Listen, when a man starts pulling away, most women rush to find answers. But what happens when you stop chasing and instead match his distance? What goes through his mind when the attention he once took for granted suddenly vanishes? The answer might surprise you, because sometimes your quiet says more than 1,000 words ever could. There is a moment in many relationships that changes everything. It isn't a fight, it isn't a breakup, it isn't even a hard conversation. It's the moment someone realizes the effort is no longer being returned. The texts get shorter, the calls come less often, the spark slowly dims, and suddenly, one person finds themselves holding up the entire relationship alone. Many women reach this point and instantly start questioning themselves. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I try harder? Should I be the one to reach out? Should I fight to keep this alive? These questions feel natural, but they often trap you in a painful loop. The more one person gives, the less the other feels they need to give back. The more available you make yourself, the more your value can start to fade into the background. Today, I want to share a story with you, not because every problem has a neat solution, but because stories often help us understand ourselves better. Let me introduce you to a woman named Hannah. Hannah was warm-hearted, the type of woman who never forgot a birthday, the type who checked in on people when they were unwell, the type who stayed loyal even when that loyalty wasn't matched. When Hannah met Michael, she thought she had finally found something real. At first, Michael gave her everything she wanted. He called regularly, planned dates, listened closely, and made her feel truly seen. Every message from him lit up her day, and every conversation felt easy. Like so many relationships, it started out feeling like magic, but then something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost without her noticing. Michael's calls grew less frequent. His messages got shorter, his energy felt lower. Sometimes hours would pass before he replied. Sometimes whole nights went by without a single word from him. Hannah picked up on it right away. Women tend to sense emotional shifts long before they're ever put into words. At first, she made excuses for him. Maybe work was overwhelming, maybe life was hectic, maybe he just needed space. She gave him the benefit of the doubt. Then she gave it again and again. Before long, she realized she was doing nearly all the reaching out. She started most of the conversations. She checked in first. She kept the connection alive on her own. And every time she sensed him drifting, she moved closer to close the gap. That's what caring people often do. When they're afraid of losing someone, they try even harder. But one night, Hannah sat by herself in her apartment, staring at her phone. She had sent him a sweet message that morning. 12 hours later, still nothing. Yet she could see he'd been online. She stared at the screen, not angry, not jealous, just worn out, emotionally drained. And for the first time, she asked herself a new question. Not why is he distancing himself, but why am I putting in so much effort to hold on to someone who keeps choosing to walk away? That single question shifted everything, because real growth often starts when we stop obsessing over someone else's actions and start looking closely at our own. The next day, Hannah made up her mind. She would stop chasing. Not out of spite, not as a strategy to manipulate him, not for payback. She would simply mirror the energy coming her way. If he texted, she'd reply kindly. If he called, she'd pick up. But she would no longer be the only one holding the relationship together. At first, it felt strange, deeply uncomfortable even. Most people don't realize how hard it is to break a habit that's become emotional. She wanted to message him. She wanted answers. She wanted comfort. But instead, she turned her attention inward. She went back to the things she used to enjoy. She spent more time with her friends. She started exercising again. She picked up books she'd left unfinished. Piece by piece, she rebuilt the parts of her life she'd set aside while pouring so much into someone else. Days went by, and then something interesting began to happen, Michael noticed. Now, here's something a lot of people get wrong about men. Men often start to recognize value once its absence creates a noticeable difference. When something is always there, it can start to feel guaranteed. But once that same thing becomes scarce, awareness kicks in. Michael wasn't used to Hannah's silence. He wasn't used to waiting on her. He wasn't used to wondering where she was. For the first time, he was feeling the very distance he had been the one to create. And that distance made him stop and think. This is usually where men start asking themselves questions. Why hasn't she texted? Is she upset with me? Is she pulling away? Did something change between us? Notice something interesting here. These are almost the exact same questions she had once asked herself. The emotional mirror had finally flipped, and suddenly he was standing right where she used to stand. Most men aren't purposely cold when they start to drift. Sometimes they get too comfortable, sometimes distracted, sometimes careless, sometimes still figuring out what they actually want. But when the effort they're used to receiving suddenly matches what they're putting in, they can't avoid facing the truth. For Michael, that truth was uncomfortable to sit with. He started checking his phone more. He noticed she wasn't as available. And most of all, he noticed how much emotional support she had quietly been giving all along. Here's the thing about people. We often don't recognize steady, reliable love until it's gone. Someone who always checks in, always supports you, always listens, always shows up. Those things can start to feel invisible simply because they're constant. But take them away and suddenly their worth becomes crystal clear. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, Michael finally picked up the phone and called. Not because Hannah pushed him to, not because she chased after him, not because she begged for his attention. He called because curiosity had been building inside him. Curiosity is a powerful thing. People chase after what they sense they might lose. People think about what they no longer fully understand. People appreciate what takes real effort to keep. When Hannah answered, she sounded calm, friendly, warm, but different. Not cold, not resentful, just grounded. For the first time in months, her happiness wasn't hanging on the outcome of one phone call, and Michael could feel that shift in her. Men often pick up on confidence before they can even explain why. They notice when a woman no longer needs approval to feel worthy. They notice when her self-respect outweighs her fear of losing him. That kind of energy changes everything, because confidence pulls people in a way looks alone never fully can. Confidence signals abundance. Confidence signals self-worth. Confidence signals that your life still has meaning no matter what someone else chooses to do. And that realization can spark powerful thoughts in a man's mind. He starts wondering what changed. He starts wondering if he misread her worth all along. He starts wondering if someone else might come along and appreciate what he overlooked. Suddenly, the certainty he once felt starts to slip away. And it's usually certainty that breeds complacency. The moment that certainty fades, attention tends to come back. But here's the lesson most people overlook. Matching his distance was never about making him chase you. It was about refusing to abandon yourself. So many people mistake this approach for a way to control someone else's feelings. It isn't. It's about reclaiming your own. It's about remembering that your worth doesn't grow just because someone picks you. And it doesn't shrink just because someone pulls away. Your value was there before the relationship began. Your value is there while the relationship exists. And your value stays with you even if the relationship comes to an end. That is the truth Hannah slowly came to understand. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Not because Michael had changed, but because she had. And when someone shifts from neediness to self-respect, from chasing to choosing, from fear to confidence, everything about the relationship changes. What happened next would teach both Hannah and Michael something neither of them would ever forget. A few days after that phone call, Michael caught himself thinking about Hannah more than he had in months. It came in small moments, while driving home from work, while scrolling on his phone late at night, while sitting alone on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The odd part was that Hannah hadn't done anything dramatic. She hadn't posted cryptic messages online. She hadn't tried to make him jealous. She hadn't started fights. She had simply stepped back and let reality show itself, and reality was starting to speak loudly inside Michael's mind. For the first time, he was living the relationship without Hannah holding it together. There were no constant check-ins, no sweet good morning texts, no emotional cushion waiting for him every day, and that missing piece forced him to face something uncomfortable. He had gotten used to receiving effort without truly valuing it. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea, this isn't a story about blaming men. Women can fall into the same pattern. People often stop noticing value once it becomes too familiar. The lesson applies to everyone, but in Michael's case, familiarity had made him blind. He had stopped truly seeing Hannah, not because she had changed, but because he assumed she'd always be around. That assumption is risky in any relationship. The moment we believe someone will never leave, never change, never grow weary, and never walk away, we start taking their presence for granted. One evening, Michael sat with a friend named David. They had known each other for years. After chatting about work and daily life, David picked up on something off. "You seem distracted," he said. Michael gave a small laugh. David leaned back. "What's going on?" Michael paused. Then he admitted something he had never said out loud before. "Hannah's been feeling different lately." David gave a slight smile. "Different how?" Michael thought it over. "She's not reaching out the way she used to." "And how often do you reach out to her?" That question hit harder than Michael expected, because sometimes the questions we avoid are exactly the ones we need. He realized he didn't have a solid answer. For months, he had expected Hannah to keep the connection alive. For months, she had carried the emotional weight. For months, he had enjoyed effort he wasn't fully returning. And now that the effort had faded, he could feel the gap. David looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe she's tired." Those 3 words stuck with Michael. Maybe she's tired. Not angry, not dramatic, not playing games, just tired. Tired of carrying something that was meant to be shared. Tired of giving without getting anything back. Tired of hoping things would get better. Many women watching this right now know that kind of exhaustion. It isn't loud, it doesn't show up in a single day. It builds slowly, one disappointment at a time, one unanswered message at a time, one broken promise at a time, one moment of feeling unimportant at a time, until something inside you finally shifts. Not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand that caring alone can't hold up a relationship. Meanwhile, Michael's thoughts kept growing stronger. The more Hannah focused on her own life, the more obvious her absence became. This is one of the biggest paradoxes of human nature. The harder you chase someone, the less room they have to miss you. The moment you stop chasing, room opens up, and inside that room, awareness begins to grow. Michael started replaying old memories. Their first date, their long talks, the nights they laughed so hard they could barely breathe, the support Hannah gave him during hard times, the encouragement she offered when no one else believed in him. Memories tend to come into focus once distance enters the picture. Sometimes we don't fully see a blessing while we're standing right inside it. Only after we step away do we understand what it was really worth. Weeks later, Michael sent Hannah a message, not out of boredom, not for attention, but because he genuinely wanted to talk to her. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, comfortably, yet something had shifted. The old imbalance was no longer there. Hannah no longer sounded like someone waiting to be picked. She sounded like someone who had already chosen herself. And that difference hit Michael hard. You see, when a woman finally recognizes her own worth, something powerful happens. She stops bargaining for basic respect. She stops pleading for consistency. She stops trying to convince people to care. Instead, she simply watches actions and makes her decisions based on them. That kind of strength can't be faked, and men can feel it, not because it's loud, but because it's rare. Michael began noticing more. He noticed Hannah laughing more often. He noticed she seemed happier. He noticed she no longer relied emotionally on how he responded. And suddenly a new thought crossed his mind. What if I actually lose her? Now, this is the moment a lot of people wish for. The moment the other person finally sees your value. The moment they finally wake up. The moment they start chasing you. But here's the truth nobody mentions. By the time that realization hits, the person who was once chasing has usually already changed. Growth shifts priorities, healing shifts standards, self-respect shifts expectations. The version of Hannah who would have settled for crumbs 6 months earlier didn't exist anymore. She had grown, and growth changes everything. One afternoon they met for coffee. Michael got there first. As he waited, he felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. Not because Hannah intimidated him, but because he suddenly cared more than he had ever let himself admit. When she walked in, she looked calm, confident, grounded, not trying to impress anyone, just at ease with herself. And there's something deeply attractive about a person who feels at ease in their own skin. Throughout their conversation, Michael found himself listening in a new way, watching in a new way, appreciating in a new way. He noticed things he had missed before: her kindness, her intelligence, her patience, her strength. The same qualities that had always been there, the same qualities he had stopped paying attention to. At one point, Michael looked at her and asked a simple question: "Have you been happier lately?" Hannah smiled, a real smile, the kind that comes from inner peace rather than a passing moment of excitement. Actually, yes. That answer caught him off guard. For months, he had assumed her happiness depended on him. Now he understood something important. She had built a life that no longer relied entirely on his presence, and that realization brought both admiration and fear. Admiration because he respected her strength. Fear because he understood she no longer needed him the way she once had. Many men go through this exact inner struggle. When a woman constantly chases, they can feel secure. But when she becomes secure within herself, they realize they actually have to bring value to keep her around. The game disappears, the illusion disappears, only reality is left standing. And reality asks a simple question. Are you willing to match the effort of the person standing in front of you? That question now weighed heavily on Michael's heart. For the first time, he wasn't wondering if Hannah would stay. He was wondering if he had done enough to deserve her staying, and that shift changed everything. Because when a man starts questioning his own effort instead of questioning your worth, the whole dynamic of the relationship transforms. But the most important lesson wasn't happening inside Michael, it was happening inside Hannah. Because she was learning something that would protect her heart for the rest of her life. She was learning that peace matters more than chasing. Self-respect matters more than approval, and emotional freedom matters more than temporary attention. The woman who once waited nervously for every text was turning into someone completely different, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally realized that love should feel like a partnership, not a performance. And soon, both Hannah and Michael would face a choice that would show what truly lives inside a person's heart when distance becomes a mirror. The weeks that followed became a turning point that neither Hannah nor Michael saw coming. Something had shifted between them. Not suddenly, not overnight, but on a deep level. Their conversations grew more meaningful. The gaps between messages no longer felt heavy. And for the first time in a long while, neither one was pushing anything. That's one of the clearest signs of emotional growth, when a connection stops feeling like work. When you stop trying to convince someone to care, when you stop carrying the weight that should belong to two people, life starts to feel lighter, and Hannah was finally feeling that freedom. One evening, she sat on her balcony watching the sun go down. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange. The world felt quiet, calm, and in that moment she noticed something important. Months before, she would have spent that same evening staring at her phone, wondering why Michael hadn't texted, overanalyzing every little thing, making up stories in her head, searching for reassurance. But now she was simply enjoying being alone with herself. That thought almost made her laugh, because she had learned something many people take years to understand. How you treat yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. If you give up on yourself to hold on to someone else, you end up losing both. If you respect yourself, you show others how to respect you too. At the same time, Michael was going through a different kind of journey. For months, he had lived comfortably inside uncertainty. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Just enough effort to keep the relationship alive, not enough to actually nourish it. A lot of people do this, not because they're bad people, not because they enjoy causing pain, but because real commitment demands clarity. And clarity demands courage. It takes courage to fully choose someone. It takes courage to show up again and again. It takes courage to invest emotionally when nothing is guaranteed. Now, Michael could no longer hide behind not knowing. The distance Hannah had reflected back at him forced him to face the truth. He cared about her more than he had ever admitted, more than he had ever realized, and that realization led him to a new question. What was he actually going to do about it? See, awareness on its own means nothing without action. Someone can recognize your worth and still fail to treat you right. Someone can miss you and still stay inconsistent. Someone can love you and still lack the emotional maturity a healthy relationship requires. That's why actions carry more weight than feelings, because feelings only create intentions. Actions create reality. A few days later, Michael had lunch with his father. His dad was a quiet man, the kind who rarely spoke much, but when he did, people paid attention. Over the meal, Michael found himself opening up about Hannah. He told the whole story, the distance, the changes, the confusion. When he finished, his father asked him one simple question. What kind of man do you want to be? Michael blinked. He'd expected relationship advice. Instead, he got a question about character. His father went on, because this really isn't about Hannah. Michael looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" His father leaned in. "Son, whether it's Hannah or someone else down the road, every man eventually has to decide what kind of partner he wants to become." The words hung heavy in the air. You can't keep wanting the rewards of a relationship while avoiding the responsibilities that come with it. Michael sat there in silence. His father wasn't criticizing him, he was challenging him. And there's a real difference between the two. The people who truly love us don't always tell us what we want to hear. They tell us what we need to hear. For the first time, Michael stopped worrying about whether Hannah would stay. Instead, he started asking himself whether he was becoming the kind of man who deserved a healthy relationship. That single question completely shifted his outlook. Meanwhile, Hannah's life kept expanding. She signed up for classes she'd been putting off. She traveled with friends, she chased goals she'd once ignored, and every new experience added to her confidence. This is something a lot of people never quite grasp. When you stop chasing someone, the energy you get back doesn't just vanish. It gets poured into growth, into healing, into purpose, into yourself. That energy becomes fuel. And once you feel that shift, you start to understand just how much of your life had been eaten up by anxiety. One Saturday afternoon, Hannah went to a gathering hosted by a close friend. The room was full of laughter, conversation, and warmth. Standing there talking with people, she felt truly happy. Not fake happiness, not a fleeting rush, real happiness. The kind that comes from being aligned with yourself. The kind that comes from living by your own values. And right then, she got a message from Michael. Months earlier, that message would have instantly changed her whole mood. It would have taken over her entire attention. Now it was just one nice moment inside an already good day. That shift might sound small, but it's actually huge because emotional independence doesn't mean you stop caring. It means your happiness is no longer controlled by someone else's behavior. That's real freedom.